Hey everyone, how's it going? Leaving my house for the first time in a couple of days. Took some time to rest and think and reflect. I'm not here with any big hot takes because the task that we have before us is massive. One thing that I am interested in is you all. I'm interested in what you have to say, and I am most interested in hearing from you what you need from me. As your public servant, oh look at this, it's doing this again. As your public servant, as just a person, I'm really curious, what would you like to hear from me? Or hear about, or receive, or anything, see from me in this moment? No, I'm not. I don't think most people are. I think a lot of people were finding out this week what a tariff meant. That a tariff is not what China or some other country pays. It's what you pay, what we pay. I think a lot of people aren't ready for mass deportations and what that means. 1 in every 15 people in this country lives in a mixed status family. So that means that we're talking about 1 in every 15 people potentially having their families broken apart. I don't think we're ready for that, including what that means for the economy. I don't think we're ready for the censorship that is coming, and for a whole lot more. But our job right now is to get ready and to prepare. This is a not insignificant problem. It's interesting that we are in a cultural moment where on the left and the right and the center, there's just a certain cachet and reward to being an asshole. And yeah, we've seen it on the right. We also see it on the left. And I actually think that we need to be paying more attention to how a person is, because a lot of people use righteous or popular causes as an excuse or a smokescreen to let out their worst impulses or the ways that they wish they could treat people. And I think we need to pay a lot more attention to that in terms of deciding how to trust and who to trust as we move forward. I think it's a really big deal, actually. I've been getting a lot of questions to this effect. What's the game plan? What do we do? What's the deal? And what happened is so massive that it's going to take just a second. It's coming, but it's going to take a second to share. I would say personally, as I'm thinking about this, I'm going to be doing a lot more direct communication. So I think I'll be planning on using my email list to give a lot more thorough and specific things about what's on my mind and how to prepare for things. But again, that's not just a shameless plug. I do have the link here, but my recommendation is to join and enter community right now, whether it is church or your knitting circle or mosque or temple, or whether it is joining here in New York City DSA, or Working Families Party, an interest group. Get into physical community. I mean, listen, the fear is telling us something, but I also want to underscore how important it is during this time, that it actually is important to be intentional about living and living fully and bringing joy into the day-to-day and loving on the people who you love. There's like this scolding culture sometimes where it's like if someone dares to be happy in public, people want to like pounce on them. We are actually going to need that now more than ever, not in some gauzy, bubblegum kind of like deny how bad everything is kind of way, but that cultivating it is a tool of our survival. Listen, there are tons of different factors, so don't take what I'm about to say as like the one defining thing. But one thing I will say is that, Kamala Harris, where they ran a fully fledged presidential campaign, like in these swing states, even though those swing states or some of these places lost, they still stopped this rightward trend and were able to stave a lot of it off compared to states where there wasn't a fully run presidential campaign, like in New York City. Donald Trump in New York came to New York a lot. He actively campaigned in this state. He had rallies, not just the Madison Square Garden rally. He did rallies in the Bronx, rallies out in Long Island, Queens. So they had an active presidential campaign here where there wasn't others. So that's one piece of it. However, there are also a lot of places that I can tell you in my congressional district where but also nationally, a lot of House Democrats outperformed the top of the ticket. This applied in my congressional district, but it also applied to many other different kinds of congressional districts of all ideologies and geographies across the country. And there's a not insignificant amount of down ballot Democrats like myself for which there were Trump AOC precincts or Trump/Democratic House or Senate member precincts. And that, I think, is a very rich environment for us to dig into. I think, for me, I know that I'm one of the few Democrats in, safer blue seats that still runs a full field program for a general election. There's a lot of other things. As a matter of fact, let's do this right now. If you voted for Donald Trump and me, or if you voted for Donald Trump and voted Democratic down ballot, I would really love to hear from you. This is not a place of judgment. I'm not gonna put your stuff on blast or anything like that or dunk on it. That's genuinely not the intent here. I actually want to learn from you. I want to hear what you were thinking, and I just want to hear from you. So if you did that, I don't even know if anybody like that is even watching this right now, but if you are, please fill out our little Q&A here and just tell me what your thought process was. Y'all, this is why I say that we should be signing up to knock on doors and be on the phones, because the internet and mass media, which, by the way, at this point, all of these apps, Instagram, X, Twitter, whatever, it's mass media too, because they've all been bought up by billionaires the same way a lot of these television channels have. Anyways, if you're only tuning into those mediums, you will think that most people fall along this spectrum. And a lot of people don't. And that's why it's important to be at the doors. And that's why it's important to be on the phones. And that's why it's never just a little junior thing that you grow out of, but that we always need to be listening, because you will learn a lot. Another area that I thought was really interesting was hearing a lot from undocumented people and, importantly, families of undocumented people who do vote, saying that there's been no relief from Democrats or anybody else on immigration path to citizenship for 10, 20, 30 years. This is something I've been warning about, by the way. And that the influx of asylum seekers, there's a lot of misinformation about what benefits they do or may not receive, etc., that has generated a certain resentment. And I do find it very interesting how, once again, the tool of us versus them has been drawn even in this situation. I don't think a lot of people, undocumented people, realize that Trump views them as criminals too. By that I mean there's a lot of people that were like, oh, he's talking about undocumented people who are quote unquote criminals, they believe that everyone who is undocumented has committed a crime. But again, a lot of people don't see it that way. And importantly, what I find very interesting is the fissure, right? Like, even in this issue, the idea that there's like a big difference between in their view, in how these people view it, that there would somehow be a difference between an undocumented person that's been here for a while and an asylum seeker, which creates that like idea of like, I am more deserving, was powerful, compelling, exploited to effect. In fact, so much so that I started to pick up on this on the campaign trail, and I started to deliver a version of a speech when I hit different campaign stops in Wisconsin and Nevada and other places, where I started to clarify for people. Basically, it was this. You know, he's talking about you, right? They're not just talking about like just, quote unquote, just trans people or just like he's talking about you. And I had this speech because I think a lot of people didn't realize that he's talking about you. You're going to pay the tariff. Your family's going to be split up. You're not going to have access to vaccines when you have a newborn. In fact, so much so that I started to pick up on this on the campaign trail, and I started to deliver a version of a speech when I hit different campaign stops in Wisconsin and Nevada and other places, where I started to clarify for people. Basically, it was this. You know, he's talking about you, right? They're not just talking about like just, quote unquote, just trans people or just like he's talking about you. And I had this speech because I think a lot of people didn't realize that he's talking about you. You're going to pay the tariff. Your family's going to be split up. You're not going to have access to vaccines when you have a newborn. So understandably, a lot of people are sending messages in response to some of what I've shared. And people are pretty surprised or just like confounded. And of course, I get that too. Some people say maybe it's because we're both New Yorkers and we speak very directly. That's true. Some people are saying could be the direct constant contact. That could also be true. I don't know. Right now, I think we're in a lot of data gathering in terms of a mode. But what I do know is that a huge indicator of how a person voted is where they got their news from. And if you primarily get your news from social media or Google, those were actually right-leaning audiences. Or if you primarily got your news from news sources like newspapers, etc., you've went left. All right, everyone. People are really interested in the Q&As, so I would like to ask a couple more questions. Again, if you are a Trump voter, this is not a place of judgment. I'm not here to put your stuff on blast. I genuinely want to know. So here's my next question. If you are a Trump voter or if you are a Trump Dem split voter, I would like to know where you get your news from, how you got your information about the election. If it was social media, what social media platforms did you see political content on the most? Or who did you follow? What accounts and what people do you follow? Or if it's newspapers, what newspapers do you watch, TV, etc.? Would love to know if you could indulge me. Thank you. Very few, almost none. I think people need to reckon with the fact that the Supreme Court ruled that a president can commit crimes in office. Just straight up. So we have each other, and we will work really hard and throw sand in as much gears as possible. But it's important to understand how serious this situation is, and how important it is for us to care for each other, be positive with each other, be generous with each other, and not turn on each other further. Personally, I don't. I think that a lot of voters really don't like fake people, and they're sick and tired of fake politicians. And so what I actually think is worse is saying something you don't believe. And so if during the entire time in campaign season, you're saying that you're down with trans people or like the LGBT community, and then you lose an election, and then the next day you say all that stuff was wrong, I actually think what people are more upset about is someone was doing something they didn't believe and just saying something. Like, if you actually weren't about that life, why did you campaign as though you were? That, I think, is the actual core issue of the problem. Now, I will say, as I've said yesterday in my stories, that I do think that there are some things that the left and that an activist left can do to ensure that they remain committed and disciplined, that we remain committed and disciplined to growing a mass movement. And there are pockets of the left that are sometimes the most amplified online that are built on a policing structure and culture. And those elements can drive people away, put them off, etc. I think we saw a lot of that this year. How much is genuine and how much isn't genuine, I think is a legitimate question. But, that's different than fighting for people.